Welcome to Divcasts from University of Chicago Divinity School. For more of our podcasts and information about our terms of use, please see our website, divinity.uchicago.edu/podcasts.
Welcome to Swift Hall, home of the University of Chicago's Divinity School, and welcome to the 2009 Alumnus of the Year lecture. In conjunction with the Baptist Theological Union, the Divinity School has named an Alumnus of the Year annually since 1947. In doing so, the union and the school have sought together to honor a graduate who has shaped a career of unusual distinction in, as the citation reads, the field of religion. The Divinity School's self-understanding throughout its history has been that we train scholars for careers in the professoriate and ministry, and the list of honorees reflects those professional trajectories. Names such as Luking, Cole, and Buchanan stand side by side with Ogden, Chalk, and LaFleur. In doing so, the Divinity School pays tribute to the fact that the vocation it shares with this university, to be a teacher of teachers, achieves its realization in crucial respects beyond the confines of this building and this campus. This aim must ultimately take its bearings from and receive its decisive evaluation through the work of its graduates, who really do commence in other contexts upon graduation. This occasion today is thus both a wonderful opportunity to acknowledge a specific individual who has done just that, and also an important annual counsel to institutional humility. The Alumnus of the Year is chosen by the BTU in consultation with the faculty of the Divinity School. The BTU is a unique entity in American higher education. It has a historic and ongoing affiliation with the American Baptist tradition, but it serves a non-denominational, university-related divinity school. This arrangement is a synecdoche of the values that Chicago has always represented: disinterested, excellent scholarship that is fully engaged with the lived realities of religious traditions in the modern world. While this commitment is never simple and its history is complex, it remains fundamental today. Today, we gather to hear from and to celebrate Professor Roger Ellwood, PhD 1967, whom the BTU and the Divinity School have named its 2009 Alumnus of the Year. Robert Ellwood was a professor of world religions at the University of Southern California for 30 years, from 1967 until his retirement in 1997. He served as chairman of the religion department there and received the USC Faculty Lifetime Achievement Award and Distinguished Emeritus Award in 2002. He's the author of The Politics of Myth, a study of C.G. Jung, Mircea Eliade, and Joseph Campbell, among over 25 books, ranging from textbooks in religious studies to books of religious history to inspirational books written from a theosophical perspective. Born in Normal, Illinois in 1933, Professor Ellwood was educated at the University of Colorado and at Berkeley Divinity School at Yale, before matriculating at Chicago, from which he received his PhD in it with a concentration in Western religions. He has also served as an Episcopal priest and as a chaplain in the United States Navy. He now resides in Ojai, California, with his spouse, Gracia Faye Bowman Ellwood, who is an alumna of the Divinity School and completed a concentration in religion and literature, and whom he met here and married in 1965. He has 2 grown children: Richard, a teacher at the Song Hill School in Ojai, and Faye Ellen, who's also with us today, a graduate student at the Claremont Graduate University in California. The title of his address is The Mythology of Evil, a small topic. Please join me in welcoming back to Swift Hall the 2009 Divinity School Alumnus of the Year, Robert Ellwood.
Well, thank you very much, Dean Belden. First of all, let me say how honored I feel to be here today. I believe this event is not only a personal honor, but also honors the entire University of Chicago Divinity School experience, which for so many of us has been one of those landmark passages in life that profoundly affect everything since. In the novel, The Jane Austen Book Club, the character said, "You never really leave high school." That's no doubt true, but I'm going to testify that for me, a far more my case, it is not only a matter of how I think about numerous intellectual issues, and not only a matter of the academic career that followed. I am very pleased that my spouse, Mircea Eliade, is with us today, because, as Dean Rosengarten said, it was at the Divinity School that I met her some 45 years ago, and when she received an MA in Religion and Art, as it was then called, in 1964, though she got the message that if she tried to go on to a PhD, she would have to be twice as good as a man. A situation that I am sure is now totally different. She later received a PhD in Philosophy of Religion from Claremont Graduate University, and I am very proud of it. I am no less proud of our daughter, Ellen, also with us today, presently an ABD, graduate student in American Literature and Religion at Claremont. I was asked to start off this afternoon with a few reminiscences of the Divinity School as I knew it. It's not hard to get an old alumni like at my age started on such stories. I was here in the now legendary 60s. I suppose I should begin at the beginning, Aboriginal, in Illig Temples, as my teacher Mircea Eliade would have called it. Because we are now talking about the very early 60s, before I went to Chicago, even before the Kennedy assassination, which I first heard about upon returning home to Stell Hall after a graduate seminar. I did live in Stell Hall when I first started at the university here, before being married, of course, and I recall that Gracia Faye lived in Foster Hall slightly earlier even than that, and she says that she lived on the same hall with Bernadine Dorr, since, of course, notorious for the Weatherman, and as the wife of Bill Ayers, whose name came up in the recent presidential campaign. But then, in her pre-radical days, the extremely glamorous and popular young woman who got about as many phone calls as all the other girls there put together. And unfortunately, Gracia Faye's room was right by the phone. Back in the days when you usually had only one phone in the hall on the door, and so she had to take all of those calls and try to trace Bernadine down. Well, that's kind of a sidebar, so kind of interesting how things work out in the long term in ways we never expected at the time, and lives too. Even before Chicago, I was a Navy chaplain serving a battalion of Marines in Okinawa and Japan. I don't know if I did the Marines any good, but those 2 years were tremendously mind-expanding for me. Having little to go on heretofore, but the religion was a small-town Midwest America, and a rather conventional Episcopal theological education, I was suddenly thrown in with colleagues and clients of amazing variety. I had never before, as I did as a Navy chaplain, known as good friends a Southern Baptist minister, a Roman Catholic priest, or an Eastern Orthodox priest, or known fellow Americans in all their remarkable diversity. Young men out of the inner city ghetto of the coal mines of West Virginia, as well as Midwestern farms. Not only that, but for the first time in my life, I was situated in a largely non-Christian culture. I was fascinated by the Shinto shrines and Buddhist temples, no less by the shamanisms of Okinawan traditional religion, which has been termed the only traditional religion of unambiguous female leadership. And I was puzzled as to how one understood all of these religious variants from the perspective of bystander grand Christianity. Then, by chance, I came across the review of a book by Mircea Eliade, which apparently looked at religion not just in terms of creed, we believe this, they believe that, and so on, but as structures, phenomenology, as we would now call it. Structures like sacred space and time, which they more or less all have, though in varying configurations. Suddenly, a whole new image of shrine, temple, and church snapped into view. Perhaps I should have gotten beyond belief before, but the Eliade review was in fact the catalyst of a whole new way of thinking. I ordered the book, read it, and then decided that as soon as my Navy time was up, having nothing better to do, I wanted to try to go where he was, the University of Chicago Divinity School, as a graduate student in Mr. send me to Great Lakes Naval Training Station after my East Asian tour to help acclimatize me, I suppose, to Chicago. And I made my way down to the university a few times to sort of visit and get oriented. I met my principal mentor, Joseph Campbell, who I had thought to specialize in Japanese religion because of my East Asian experience, and the wonderful friend and counselor he was. He was a true sensei in the best Japanese style, seeing his students as virtually family, helpful with personal as well as academic problems, using all of his remarkably wide contacts in the academic world with the skill of a consummate diplomat to get them good jobs upon completion. And I recall the first divinity school class that I visited that fall of 1962, before actually starting my program, which was one in Charles Long's Introduction to the History of Religion. And as it happened that day, there was a guest speaker, Tom Altizer, talking about the death of God. I immediately knew that this divinity school was different from any that I had known before. I recall, in fact, my good friend Tom Owens, who just mentioning, assistant librarian in the Swift Hall Library of those days. I'd like to point out to awestruck visitors the exact place where Altizer was sitting in the library when he had his theophany, that is the right word, of the death of God. However, if there was a plaque at that spot, I suppose it's gone now as a remodeling that made that library into the buildings of the room we're now in. In the winter of 1963, I moved down to Hyde Park and began classes. I recall Chuck Wong, surely one of the great classroom teachers of all time, and of course, Mircea Eliade. The three history of religion professors of those days, Eliade, Kiyosaki, and Wong, represented three continents and three races, not to mention three very different personal paths to their position in Chicago. It was an unforgettable mix. Long was a great lecturer. Kitagawa and Eliade, both, of course, not native English speakers, were soft-spoken and scholarly. Even so, the contrast there was marked. Eliade, in the grand tradition of the European salon, was polyglot and an adventure with ideas. I can remember him saying such things to a graduate student in his very courteous, soft-spoken way, an interesting paper, but of course you overlooked that 1926 article in Polish or something like that. Kitagawa, though certainly a major scholar in Japanese religion and in the legacy of Joachim Bach, also had a keen sense of the practical. He was a man of the world in the best sense of the word. Eliade, having been perhaps overly political earlier in his native Romania, now allegedly never read newspapers or followed current events. It was rumored that he once said the last really important event in history was the discovery of agriculture. And according to student legend, once told Kitagawa to let him know if anything really significant happened, like the start of war at the time of the Cuban Missile Crisis. I recall that once at a meeting of the History of Religions Club, the faculty were asked to comment on scholarly resources. Eliade, as one might expect, gave a list of important journals in several languages. Kitagawa instead insisted that the best thing to do when starting a paper was to read a good encyclopedia article on the topic, to get a sense of the key points in bibliography. Good advice that I have often followed and given, and I would add that the best encyclopedia is now, of course, the Great Encyclopedia of Religion, the first edition of which was edited by Mircea Eliade. As a teacher, Eliade was at his best in the small graduate seminar, in which his immense learning and quiet but perceptive comments supremely came into play. In the larger classes, communication skills were occasionally shaky. I recall once that he kept talking about the religion of the Sots. We had a hard time figuring out what he meant, but eventually realized that it was the Sioux. Being Americans. Eliade obviously assuming that no American would pronounce French correctly. This gives me a chance, though, to credit him and the History of Religion program with something else. I had spent my junior and senior high school years living in a small town only a short drive from the Great Sioux reservations of South Dakota, and had occasionally visited them, depressing as they were in those days of around the 40s and 50s. But at the time I had no interest in Native American religion, my youthful imagination being far more absorbed with science fiction or romantic fantasies of medieval Europe. It took the HR program at Chicago to awaken me to the wonderfully rich heritage of Native American myth and religion, which I have lately been studying more and more. And in that connection, I would particularly like to welcome this afternoon my brother-in-law, Garrett Hogsma, the retired minister of the Christian Reformed Church. Some years ago, Garrett served a largely Navajo church and school in Fort Lincoln, New Mexico. I recall visiting him and his lovely wife Rebecca there, and in good conversations as well as visits to sacred sites and ceremonies, sharing in his profound knowledge of Navajo culture and spirituality, as well as Christian. Thank you, Garrett. These observations finally allow me an entry into the topic I would like to deal with this afternoon, mythology of evil, which, as the Dean said, is a very big topic, but on which I am writing presently a small book on a big topic, which will include several Native American examples. I had thought, incidentally, briefly, that it might be appropriate for me to discourse on Mircea Eliade and his legacy on this occasion, since that has been a very important fact in my life, but prudence led me otherwise. In recent years, Eliade has become a very controversial and divisive name, seldom arousing visceral emotions. And I would prefer today to be a happy and celebratory occasion. If anyone wants to know my take on Eliade, or referring to my book, The Politics of Myth, or for now I'd rather talk about evil, which I'm sure most of us would at least agree is a bad thing. Now, in a discussion of mythology of evil, which comes first, a definition of myth or of evil? In fact, both go together. One cannot be understood without the other. In mythological treatment, evil becomes part of a narrative. It is not a philosophical, metaphysical abstraction. It is story, and must possess the basic characteristics of story. This is, and always has been, the great strength of myth, because our lives are stories, not abstractions. Our lives can be slipped into the casings of myth, as it were, to put them in larger, even cosmic perspective. As any writer knows, a story needs a plot, and the plot requires some problem or hindrance to be overcome. The barrier can be defined mythically as evil, but any good writer and any good myth maker must also take to heart the writing school dictum, show, don't tell. The obstacle must be presented in guise of an enemy or force that can be seen or felt. That is what makes a myth of evil, in contrast to a metaphysical or theological abstraction endeavoring to define or explain it. Then, the terror seen and felt can best be made palpable by putting it at the heart of a story. Evil is the iron gate to be overleaped, the cunning foe to be outsmarted, the dark night to be bested in fair combat. Now, a myth or a story of evil would not answer all questions that could arise, for behind every story is a possible backstory. And this is a weak side of myth, I suppose. We could say that God is creator of heaven and earth, but one could then ask, as children often do, where did God come from? Who made God? Where was evil before it losed its way into our once happy fields? What happened before to make ours the kind of world in which a given story could take place? Even as the strength of myth is that it relates to the way our lives are stories, not abstractions, so its weakness is that it cannot tell what happened before the story began, to to vacantly give. But first and final questions like this are not insurmountable problems in relation to evil, for evil in the end is always inexplicable. At least so I feel. It is in St. Paul's words, the mystery of iniquity, or in those of Jesus, that which ought not to be and is, the abomination of desolation standing where it ought not. For so much in the glorious universe around us suggests a smooth, harmonious system. The stars and their courses, the circling planets, the turn of the seasons, even the natural order built into biology, birth, childhood, maturity, aging, death. All of this could point toward a profound yet rational plan, almost mathematical in its precision, like a beautiful ship sailing on its maiden voyage across a serene sea. Then something else breaks in, shattering the mosaic of balanced colors, drowning out the glorious symphony by discordant notes, like the clash of ice and steel and metal that sank the Titanic. For all we know, whole world systems teeming with life forms may be swallowed up suddenly and merciless every day by supernova or black holes. Here on planet Earth, thousands perish or suffer excruciating agony regularly from fire, flood, and famine. Few creatures born into this world, in fact, complete the full life cycle programmed into their genetic inheritance. These include not only those fish of whose innumerable spawn only a few survive to adulthood, or those countless beasts whose lives we cut short for our own purposes, but also those human beings who die young in war or disease, or who fall far short of all they could be out of poverty or exploitation. What does myth have to say about this situation? I would like to propose 8 types of myth to deal with the problem of evil. I'm well aware that schematics like this can become entirely too artificial. No doubt lines can be drawn in a number of different ways, and overlap there is between the categories. Nonetheless, this is one way to present some of the material I have gathered. The groupings are: 1, myths centering on defilement or impurity; 2, myths of evil people, such as witches; 3, myths of bringers of evil from outside Earth or outside the human sphere, such as Satan or Emeritus; 4, myths making evil part of the way things are, insisting it is built into the structure of creation; 5, myth, often humorous in tone, explaining evil or death as a result of a seemingly trivial mistake; 6, myths of initiation, which interpret evil as the necessary pain of initiation or an initiation gone wrong; 7, trickster myths, which associate evil with that intriguing mythic figure; and 8, hero myths, where evil seems to be necessary so that the hero may undergo the ordeal in which it is confronted and defeated. I will not have time today to offer examples of all of these categories, but will present a small sample. To begin with defilement and impurity, this category will forever be associated with the well-known Chicago figure, Paul Ricoeur, whose monumental study, The Symbolism of Evil, centered on it. As Ricoeur wrote, defilement itself is scarcely a representation, and what representation there is immersed in a specific sort of fear that blocks reflection. With defilement, we enter into the reign of terror. Thus, Ricoeur views this ill-defined but overwhelming sense of stain, of contamination, of sin and dread, of retribution. To be so potent and precise analysis is powerful. The horror swallows up further rational thought, even as it makes us spiritually human. Ricoeur also said, that is why primitive dread deserves to be interrogated as our oldest memory. And examples of this category we defilement and the vague but powerful feelings to which it gives rise seem the central reality, the cause almost an afterthought. In these myths of evil, then, Saturn is the real antagonist. Earth and sky themselves bespeak a pervasive presence of evil. Call it stain, spiritual pollution, and a cursed land. In tales of terror, and elder myths and fairy tales like many of those of the Brothers Grimm, to horror movies today, the real enemy is nothing so much as fear itself, that primal dread which paralyzes thought. Take, for example, these lines from the prophet Amos in the Hebrew Scriptures, in which the devastation of the land seems far more vivid than the Lord who sent it. I blasted you with black, white, and red. I laid waste your gardens and vineyards. The locusts devoured your fig trees and your olives. Yet you did not come back to me. This is the very word of the Lord. I sent plague on you like the plagues of Egypt. I killed with the sword your young men and your troops of horses. I made your calves stink in your nostrils. Yet you did not come back to me. This is the very word of the Lord. There is a reason for this pollution, but the sense of pollution itself seems prior, and at least in the opinion of Paul Ricoeur, was the primordial experience to which myth tried to predate an explanation in order to make ours a rational and just world. More developed are myths of evil people. In African and Slavic cultures especially, many, if not most, unexpected everyday calamities such as sickness, bad harvest, family discord, or queer happenings at milking time may well be attributed to an enemy, perhaps outwardly a friend or neighbor who is secretly a witch. In 1547, the disastrous fire burned much of Moscow. Popular opinion blamed it on witchcraft aimed at Tsar Ivan the Terrible. It was said that Princess Anna Lenskaya had soaked human hearts in water. The evil aristocrat then sprinkled that water over buildings and set fire to it. A male relative of hers was killed by an angry mob in retribution. Even birds and animals may be witches in disguise. Russian witches were said to be able to control weather and even to steal the light of the moon. They had an inveterate appetite for milk and could drain a cow dry at a distance simply by sticking a knife into a tree. It was said that one peasant, facing ruin because the milk of his herd was being taken, stood watch one night in his barn. Toward midnight, he saw a cat steal in. Then, before his astonished eyes turned into a woman who began milking a cow. The peasant took an axe, and with one blow severed the thief's arm at the wrist. He went home satisfied with his night's work. But back in the house, he found his mother moaning in pain, blood flowing from the stump of her arm. One thing I would like to do as a study is to present recent parallels to traditional mythology in the spirit of Eliade's camouflages of the sacred. Consider the satanic panic of the years around 1980, which swept through the United States, Britain, and other English-speaking countries. Numerous articles appeared in the popular media presenting accounts of so-called ritual abuse, replete with satanic symbols. Often these outrages were alleged to have taken place in preschools and daycare centers, based on the accounts of children who reportedly told counselors and police officers of strange games and plays in which they were expected to engage. These often were said to involve sodomy, devil masks and robes, animal or human body parts, even the sacrifice of babies. The most notorious case was the 1984 to 1990 trial involving the McMartin Preschool in the suburb of Los Angeles, which ended up being the most expensive court case in California history. Despite extensive lurid testimony from children and parents, no hard evidence of crime was ever found. No bodies or definitely satanic artifacts. And in the end, the defendant teachers and proprietors of the school were released after two successive juries had deadlocked. But the McMartin teachers and other even less fortunate individuals who were actually convicted and imprisoned in these bizarre cases found their schools, careers, and lives ruined nonetheless. It is now almost universally believed that the satanic panic was spurious, despite its promotion by certain wings of resurgent evangelical Christianity. Perhaps it reflected anxious and changing times. This was nearly the first generation of families in which both husband and wife typically went out to work, for forced leaving young children to daycare centers and preschools. Deep concern as to whether this was truly right, and what kind of care their precious young ones would receive from surrogate parents may have been projected into satanic fantasies. One can only speculate. As for the outsider, one need only mention the biblical Satan and his evolution in Christian lore. The traditional Satan, I suppose, is put together from scattered references throughout Scripture, together with bits of Jewish and other folklore and extra-canonical apocalyptic. The Zoroastrian model of the eternal adversary of God, Ahriman, Lord of the Lie, over against Ahura Mazda, Lord of Light. A theological construction. But in the end, it is a powerful picture. Above all, it's painted by John Milton in his great epic poem, Paradise Lost, 1667. It has in fact been said that the average Englishman believes everything in Paradise Lost is to be found somewhere in the Bible. Here Satan, even before Genesis, fought heaven and was therefore cast out, reaching a place of no light, but rather darkness visible. Regions of sorrow, doleful shades, where peace and rest will never dwell. Hope never comes, that comes to all. Nevertheless, Satan, the great rebel against the omnipotent God, in words which some readers have found perversely appealing, declares his is a mind not to be changed by place or time. The mind is its own place, and in itself can make a heaven of hell a hell of heaven. For to reign is worth ambition, though in hell, better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. Thus the enemy of good can declare, farewell happy feelings, and again farewell remorse. All good to me is lost, evil will be done my good. None other than this defiant and cunning being took the form of the lowly serpent, with the view to spoil hated heaven by marring its greatest creation. But even he could not but pause for a moment before Eve. Abashed the devil stood and felt how awful goodness is, and saw virtue in her shape, how lovely. But he continued to do what he had set out to do. Well, the biblical and Masonic Satan reminds us that the author of evil, though from outside the world as we ordinarily know it, is nonetheless also a part of it, full of feelings and even gestures not entirely inhuman. Even as the sociopath next door, though strange, may also seem familiar. It is as though the alien is like a magnifying glass, enlarging for inspection what is already here, though mixed in with everything else. Now, the notion of the presence of evil is as just part of the way things are, in other words, the way the world is set up, is clearly implied in polytheistic myths of creation, and especially the divine twin kind of myth. Mircea Eliade once wrote of a folk tale involving God and Satan from his native Romania, who appeared in one of the Erasmus Yards. The story is found in variants throughout Southeast Europe and seems to be ultimately a Manichaean and Zoroastrian derivation through the former's medieval Bogomil descendant. It seems that before the creation of the world, nothing there was but infinite sea, above which God and Satan dwelt together. Both appear to have existed since beginningless time. But God is in some manner superior to Satan, only he could create. When God decided to create the world, he sent Satan to dive into the depths of the sea and bring out the seed of land. He was told to do so in the name of God, but the lesser immortal invoked instead his own name, and the blood slipped through his fingers when he brought it to the surface. Finally, the third time he took it up in both his own name and God's, this time enough remained under his fingernails for God to use. The deity made himself a mound of earth, and there he lay down to rest. Now Satan, thinking his companion was asleep, had the idea of pushing him in the water to drown, and so then he alone would be the master of earth. But the more the devil rolled God toward the water's edge, the more land appeared under it. On and on, until vast expanses of earth had replaced the primordial sea. And the evil one had to recognize the futility of his project. In this intriguing story, both God and Satan are twins, equal and of unknown origin. Both have the trickster quality of wanting to fool the other. Yet God has the edge. His stratagems work, and the others do not. But one senses this battle of wits will go on for a long time. The modern mythology of popular entertainment refers back to that classic evil time theme over and over. A Star Trek episode, The Alternative Factor, shows a pathetic heroic figure forever wrestling in a corridor between the worlds with his antimatter brother, each knowing that if either one got final supremacy over the other, all would be destroyed. In the TV series Bewitched, Samantha Stevens had an evil twin sister, Serena, and I Dream of Jeannie, another glamorous modern witch narrative. Jeannie likewise had an unnamed evil twin sister. The idea of parallel universes, suggested as possible realities by some of the more cutting-edge ideas of recent cosmology and physics, is becoming a staple of speculative fiction. An ideal medium for exploring dualistic, yet built into the universe, interpretations of good and evil. These are mythic narratives that make both good and evil, as humans understand them, factored into the fabric of the universe as it is. It may be, however, that in such a universe, man is not the measure of all things, and that from a different perspective, those energies that seem to us evil would have another meaning, perhaps no meaning at all, or perhaps something beyond our understanding. As for the trivial mistake, here is an African creation story offering a wryly amusing tale about the origin of evil and death. Time and again, on that often troubled and yet resilient continent, one encounters a spirit that seems to say, if we can't do anything about the human situation and its tragedies, why not just laugh instead of weep? Perhaps it is all a big joke, or a big cosmic mistake of some kind. Take, for example, the common myth of the failed messenger to explain human death. The Limba people of Sierra Leone noted that the snake could avoid death, or so it seemed, just by changing his skin. Afterwards, he looked bright and fresh as new. People said that originally humans were supposed to have been able to rejuvenate themselves in the same way. But something went wrong. What happened? First, we have to meet Kanu, the Limbo creator and high god. At the beginning, this all-competent yet sensitive deity had lived on earth among people and animals, but withdrew to heaven because the animals refused to stop quarreling when asked to make peace. While still on earth, Kanu had intended for both human and animals not to die. He prepared a medicine that would prevent death. He gave part of it to the snake, and it worked for him. He then handed a bowl containing the rest of the elixir to the snake, telling him to take it to the limbo. But the toad did not check spill it. Toad insisted on taking it himself, even though Kano asked him not to. Nonetheless, the amphibian took the vessel on his head, apparently in no great awe of a deity that seemed more like a part of the world than above it. He then started hopping, and when he hopped the second time, the fluid of life all spilled. Kano refused to make more owing to the disobedience of the toad, and for that reason all people and animals died, except the snake, who dies only if someone kills him. Now, the point is not whether the Limba people necessarily believed a story like this in exactly the same way that, say, a contemporary creationist claims to believe the book of Genesis. It is just a story, but one which inculcates a certain attitude toward the mysteries of death and evil. And it is not an attitude of solemnity or stoic resignation. One can imagine a good storyteller playing up the tale of Toad and Snake to great comic effect, Snake going like this, Toad hopping, and so forth. The attitude is suggested that if we can't do anything about evil and death, why not laugh instead of cry? The essence of humor lies in the unexpected and incongruous. And what is more so than a creature as great as human beings who should nonetheless suffer and die? Now, as for the next category, myths in which the ordeals of initiation themselves seem evil, or in which the initiate becomes capable of doing evil as a result of the initiation, are not uncommon. The berserkers of ancient northern Europe, for example, apparently were initiated by having to fight with bears or wolves as well as their fellow berserkers. They were then initiated by having the skin of a bear or wolf put on them, thus acquiring the spirit of the animal, and with it the power to fight with the beast's merciless ferocity. Or consider a more recent example, Peggy Sanders' study Fraternity Gang Rape. From a superficially very different milieu, an American college fraternity which had gotten into serious trouble because of episodes of gang rape at its parties. Yet the same berserker motif, initiation into a bonding and a state of consciousness that makes acceptable what would be morally unacceptable on an individual basis, clearly obtains here. Initiation can lead one to do, as part of an initiate group, what otherwise one would not do. And if that thing is evil, then initiation is a source of evil. The initiations of this particular fraternity were traumatic enough. An insider, identified as Sean, said, "We felt that salvation is achieved through brotherhood and nothing else, certainly not our individuality, mattered at all." After the taking part of the individual in initiation, the brethren had no moral code except the brotherhood. The fraternity was able to create a private society in which they could see those outside its parameters as weak, potential victims, in a real sense, subhuman. As Sean again put it, everyone and everything was open to ridicule. All people and all standards became vulnerable because we had powerfully felt our own vulnerability in the initiation. That was our deepest kept secret, the thing that really separated us from the world outside. We knew how insignificant people can feel when they are really up against the wall, how insignificant we felt during initiation. Our initiation experience and new knowledge constituted the deepest insight to the sacred revelation. Now we could be masters of life. We could toy with it and watch with amusement as everyone else staggered blindly through it. Ironically, in view of the fraternity's customary attitude toward women, as among those with whose lives they could toy and whose vulnerabilities they could exploit, the central figure in the myth behind the draconian initiation is a so-called astral goddess. The initiates claim that the secrets of the brotherhood were first given them by a Greek goddess, and it was to her astral plane that they ascend in initiation. But it is not uncommon for males who bought female figure. In this, as in so many initiations, men who feel powerless alone as youth, as prisoners. I often also have some information, very interesting, on the myths and rituals of initiation in prison gangs. As students seeking bonding to a group which collectively is all-powerful. Perhaps its power is strengthened all the more by identity with an animal or divine source of superhuman power. But with this power they can work evil as well as good. The temptation toward the former, for those who feel raised by the loss of self and initiation to a place beyond good and evil, is very great. Finally, lastly, a mythic figure placing evil somewhere between accident and tragedy, between joke and sorrow, is a trickster, well represented by that Native American troublemaker, Coyote. This animal is wily, cunning, ruthless, and unwilling to defer to anyone else, man, beast, or God. He is deliberately rebellious against the benign forces of the universe in a way that Adam and Eve, in their naivete, perhaps would not. For Coyote is out only for himself. Even his sense of humor has an edge to it. His jokes can be cruel. Yet for all that, Coyote is appealing in his cleverness, his disguises, and his ruses, by which he sometimes outsmarts even himself. For all his unscrupulousness and bad conduct, there is something captivating about the gamer's boundless energy, seemingly an inexhaustible bag of tricks. People who have made Coyote's acquaintance rarely tire of hearing of his exploits. Native Americans have enjoyed his tales around the campfire for centuries. Coyote stories are a good example of the mythic story told in large part for entertainment, no doubt in many versions. Such myths are not intended to be believed in any literal or profoundly theological sense, even though they may recite of important things: creation, life, and death. Yet such stories, like all myth, do have about them a tone or attitude, indicating a way of relating to the world, even to the problem of evil. Are we to chuckle or lament at the rocky way the world universe seems to be set up, or simply stand in awe before the first and last things? In the case of Coyote stories, the suggestion is that much is wondrous and beautiful about the world, yet the gods, humans, and animals animating it are not always reliable, though always entertaining. They can send currents in contrary directions and go beyond what was intended. Even so, what can we do but laugh and enjoy the story? Here is a Coyote story from the mind of the people of California. At the beginning, when nothing lay below but endless waters, two beings, Earthmaker and Coyote, looked down and began talking about how the property might be developed. Earthmaker, a respectable god, wanted to create a good, decent world in which pain and death were not, and spouses remained faithful to one another. But Coyote said in effect, why not make it a little more interesting? He's not exactly evil, and at first he and Earthmaker are not antagonists. The two are like good buddies, talking enthusiastically about their new project, Earth. But clearly they are of different temperaments. One is straight, well-meaning, but a little dull and unimaginative. The other more interested in angles and bursting with imagination, more than is called for, but enough to get him into trouble. Clearly, the mind who considered the world offered plenty of evidence for both of these personalities at work in its dramas. And in time, Earthmaker and Coyote had fallen out. Earthmaker wanted the people he was making, when they died, to be placed in water overnight, and then be able to rise up again the next morning. And he wanted even married couples to be settled, since there was no need for procreation in a world without death. Coyote said of this, but you, Earthmaker, are not speaking for human contentment and joy. But I speak for a world where men can laugh and feel good, come to take delight in themselves, and the women they care for, so that an old man flirting and playing around with a young woman should feel like a lad again, and women should feel that way too. Coyote obviously felt that a world without flirting, love, and sex was hardly worth living in, even if the price was death. For a mortal life in such a world would be bound to get very boring. To this, Earthmaker had no answer. So he thought to himself, you, Coyote, have overcome me in everything, so then without my saying so, let there be death in the world. But, as happened more often than not, Coyote's victory came back on himself. Not long afterward, he sent his own fine son to fetch some water. On that simple expedition, the boy was bitten by a rattlesnake and died. Then Coyote cried out to Earthmaker, may I never say such things again. You must make my son come back to life. But Earthmaker paid no attention, and Coyote, full of anger and remorse as he learned what death meant in personal as well as in theoretical terms, could only say of Earthmaker, I will chase him no longer. I will never catch up with him. Now in conclusion, let me once again affirm, but I'm sure that mainly I will take from this event happy memories that, as it were, complete a cycle in the part of the life that began here at the University of Chicago, the Medical School. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Ellwood, and we have two more things to do. As is our tradition here at the Divinity School, the occasion of this gift is accompanied by the presentation of a plaque. And so I'm pleased to present Professor Ellwood with this plaque, which says, for his scholarship, which has resulted in numerous articles and over 20 books that span the genres of scholarly monograph and cultural history, for his insightful commentary on the impact of Eastern spiritual traditions on popular religion in America, for his myriad contributions as scholar and teacher to the study of religion in American colleges and universities. The Baptist Theological Union names Roger Ellwood for Alumnus of the year 2009 of the University of Chicago Divinity School, in April 2009. Congratulations. We have a reception plan in the common room on the first floor of the building, to which you are all cordially invited, and I hope to see you down there. Thank you very much. We're adjourned here.
We thank you for listening to or viewing our podcast. For more information and for other podcasts, please see our website, divinity.uchicago.edu/podcasts. Copyright, the University of Chicago Divinity School.